Going fishing again, called out a familiar hoarse voice. Maksim turned around. Standing on the porch of a small wooden house was Yegor Stepanovich Kravtsov, or simply Stepanik, as everyone in the village of Tolinka called him, a stocky man in his 60s with a face lined with wrinkles and a sharp, piercing gaze. He was tapping out his pipe on the railing. "Where else would I go?" Maksim smiled, tossing a backpack full of gear into the UAZ. "Trying to calm your nerves?" Stepanik squinted one eye, eyeing the young man closely. Maksim paused. In the 6 months since he'd returned to his native village after demobilization, Stepanik had been the only one who understood his condition without needing many words, perhaps because he himself had gone through Afghanistan 30 years earlier. "I'm healing," Maksim admitted. "Should be good fishing at the northern spit today. Grayling should bite well in this weather." Stepanik took a drag from his pipe and exhaled a ring of smoke. "Be careful. Yesterday, the rangers saw fresh tracks of a large female bear with a cub out that way. Looks like she's strayed from her usual territory." "You think it's dangerous?" "It's spring. A mother with a cub is a volatile combination. You should take a rifle." Maksim instinctively clenched his fists as a chill ran down his spine. The last time he held a weapon, no. He shook his head, pushing away the unwanted memories. "I'll manage without it," he said more sharply than intended, then added gently, "Thanks for the warning, Stepanik. I'll stay alert." The old ranger nodded with understanding. He didn't know the details of Maksim's last battle, where he lost half his squad, but he sensed that the young man had his own demons when it came to weapons. "The weather's going to turn later," Stepanik said, changing the subject. "They're forecasting a strong storm. Don't go too far." "I'll be back by noon," Maksim promised, slamming the UAZ door. Before we begin, let us know where you're from, subscribe, leave a like, and stay until the end. We begin. The northern spit greeted him with silence and the crisp freshness of morning. Maksim parked his vehicle in a small clearing and proceeded on foot, relying more on memory than on the barely visible trail. He had known this place since childhood. His father often brought him here to fish, teaching him how to tie flies and cast a line. "See, Max. The fly should land softly, almost weightless. The fish won't even know it's a trick." It was as if he could still hear his father's voice. His father had died 6 years ago from a heart attack while Maksim was in the academy. He never got to say goodbye. Perhaps that's why he returned to Tolinka after his service, to close an unfinished chapter, to find peace in the places that once made him happy. The spit was a narrow strip of sandy and pebbled shore jutting nearly 50 meters into the river. One side was lapped by the main current, the other formed a quiet bay where large fish liked to linger near the reeds. Maksim unpacked his lightweight carbon rod, a gift from his father on his 18th birthday. "You'll go away to study, son, but the river will always wait for you." He smiled at the memory and began assembling the tackle with practiced hands. His fingers remembered every knot and loop, even when his mind was elsewhere. And his mind often wandered, haunted by nightly nightmares of the BTR exploding, by guilt over surviving, and endless questions of what if. Fishing helped. Here, by the water, with the rustling reeds and lapping waves, the restless thoughts receded. Only he, the river, and the fish remained, a simple, understandable system. Maksim made his first cast. The fly landed gently a few meters from shore, where the current formed a small whirlpool. Less than a minute passed before the line went taut. A quick tug, and a silver grayling was wriggling on the hook. "Hello, beauty," Maxim murmured as he carefully removed the hook and dropped the fish into his net. The morning proved fruitful. By 10 a.m., he had already caught 5 decent graylings and 1 small trout. The sun rose high, and the bite slowed. Maxim decided to take a break, sat down on a large flat rock by the water's edge, and pulled a thermos of tea from his backpack. It was at that moment he felt someone watching him. Slowly, avoiding sudden movements, Maxim turned his head. At the edge of the forest, in the shade of young birch trees, stood a small brown bear cub, perhaps 9 months old. Not a helpless infant, but far from full-grown. It looked at him with clear curiosity, occasionally glancing at the net full of fish. Maxim froze. His first thought, where's the mother? Bear mothers rarely let their cubs stray far, especially in spring when dangers lurk everywhere. Berries hadn't ripened yet, food was scarce. The mother should have been vigilant, but she was nowhere in sight. The cub shifted from paw to paw and gave a soft growl. Now that the initial surprise had passed, Maxim noticed how thin the animal was, nearly emaciated. Its ribs showed through its sparse fur, and its eyes looked too large for its narrow face. Hungry, Maxim realized. He immediately remembered Stepanika's words about the mother bear and cub. Where is she? Why is the little one alone? The cub took a hesitant step forward, then another. It was clearly afraid, but something, hunger or desperation, pushed it toward the man. Or more precisely, toward the fish. Maxim knew he should make noise, scare it away. Even a young bear could be dangerous. But something about its behavior felt off, troubling, and almost human. Hey, little one, Maxim said quietly. Did you lose your mom? The bear cub froze, watching the man cautiously, then took another step forward. In its eyes, Maxim saw a hope so raw, he had to swallow the lump in his throat. Hungry, huh? He reached toward the net. All right, help yourself. But then you go look for your mom, okay? Maxim took a small grayling from the net and placed it on the rock, then stepped back a few paces. The cub sniffed the air. The smell of fresh fish was clearly tempting, but its fear of humans still kept it in place. Finally, hunger won. The little bear rushed to the rock, snatched the fish in its teeth, and darted back into the forest. There, it paused as if evaluating the situation. Then, to Maxim's surprise, it didn't eat the fish, it turned and ran deeper into the woods. Strange, Maxim murmured. Very strange. A hungry animal usually eats right away, especially a young, inexperienced one. Why did the cub take the fish instead of eating it on the spot? Maybe it really was looking for its mother. Or taking food to siblings? Maxim shrugged and returned to his fishing, but his focus was scattered. He kept glancing toward the forest, expecting the strange visitor to reappear. He didn't have to wait long. About 40 minutes later, having caught a few more fish, he saw the cub again. This time, it emerged from the trees with more confidence, as if it now knew what to expect. It stopped a few meters from him, growling softly while shifting its gaze from Maxim to the net of fish. Back again, huh? Maxim smirked. So, no sign of Mama? The cub shifted from paw to paw, eyes fixed on the fisherman. All right, here's another one. Maxim pulled out a small trout and placed it on the same rock, stepping back once again. The scene repeated itself. The cub waited, then dashed over, grabbed the fish, and ran into the forest, again, without eating it on the spot. Now it wasn't just odd, it was outright unusual. Maxim frowned, trying to decipher the animal's behavior. Bears are intelligent, but such purposeful actions were beyond typical instinct. By noon, the bite had stopped almost entirely. The fish had retreated into deeper water to escape the heat. Maksim decided to wade into the river. Luckily, he had worn waders, special waterproof pants with boots, essential for fly fishing. He carefully stepped into the stream, feeling the cold water embrace his legs. In the middle of the spit, the depth reached just above the knee, perfect for casting into the main current where larger fish swam. Maksim made several trial casts, enjoying the process itself. The sun played on the surface, turning the river into a glittering mirror. A cool breeze refreshed his face. For a moment, it felt like all the bad things were behind him: war, the death of friends, sleepless nights. Suddenly, there was a splash to his right. Maksim turned frozen in surprise. The bear cub had returned, but this time, he didn't stay on the shore. The animal stepped into the water and now stood knee-deep, just a few meters from the man, carefully watching the fishing process. "What are you doing?" Maksim asked quietly, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. "Decided to learn how to fish yourself?" The cub stood motionless, occasionally sniffing. There was neither fear nor aggression in his behavior, only a strange, almost unnatural determination. At that moment, the fishing line tightened. A strong jerk nearly tore the rod from Maksim's hands. A large fish. He began reeling it in, trying not to lose it, while at the same time keeping the cub in the corner of his eye. The animal seemed to understand what was happening. It leaned forward slightly, watching the man struggle with the fish with obvious interest. When Maksim finally pulled out a large grayling, the cub made a quiet sound, something between a growl and a whimper. "Is this what you want?" Maksim showed him the fish. "All right, take it, but later you'll tell me where you're taking all of them." He carefully stepped onto the shore, placed the grayling in the usual spot, and stepped back. The cub also emerged from the water, shook himself off, took the fish, and disappeared into the forest again. Something was definitely off. The cub acted too deliberately, almost as if it were asking for help. The thought seemed absurd to Maksim, but it wouldn't leave him alone. A wild animal asking a human for help? Unthinkable. And yet, maybe he should follow him, Maksim thought. Curiosity wrestled with caution. What if the cub led him to a mother bear? A female with a cub, the most dangerous combination in the forest. But something told him that things weren't that simple. The decision came when the cub appeared for the fourth time. Now the animal looked worried. He stepped onto the shore but didn't come closer, nervously shifting from paw to paw and occasionally glancing toward the forest. "Something happened, little one?" Maksim asked, feeling anxiety rising inside him. He took the last grayling from the fish basket and placed it on a stone. The cub immediately grabbed the fish, but didn't run off right away. He took a few steps toward the forest, then turned around, as if checking whether the man was following. "He's really calling me," Maksim realized, and the thought both amazed and scared him. "All right," he said aloud, quickly gathering his gear. "Show me where you're taking my fish." Following the bear cub turned out to be no easy task. The animal moved confidently, as if along an invisible trail, occasionally stopping and glancing back, as if checking whether his strange companion was keeping up. Maksim tried to stay at a distance, close enough not to lose sight of his guide, but far enough to react if things went wrong. The forest grew denser. Young birch trees gave way to tall pines and spruces, with thick undergrowth between them. It smelled of resin, damp leaves, and blood. That smell, Maksim would recognize it among thousands. Too often, it had soaked his hands in the field hospital, a sweet, metallic, heavy scent. The cub dove into a thicket of willows and disappeared. Maksim stopped and listened. Silence, only a woodpecker knocking in the distance and the wind rustling the treetops. He cautiously parted the branches and peeked into a natural alcove formed by dense shrubs. And now, he stood in front of a wounded mother bear, finally understanding why the cub had so persistently asked for fish. The mother couldn't hunt, and her only provider had become her cub, still too inexperienced to catch food on his own. But how had he even thought to ask a human for help? The bear growled weakly, trying to get up, but immediately collapsed with a groan. The wound on her side looked bad, clearly a bullet wound, already beginning to fester. A twig cracked behind him. Maksim turned sharply, peering into the dim forest. Was it his imagination, or was someone really watching them? Poacher, he muttered through clenched teeth. They'd fired and failed to finish the job. As a former medic, he could see that without help, the bear wouldn't last more than a day or two. And what would happen to the cub without his mother? At this age, he was doomed. At that moment, the cub came right up to him and growled softly, looking up from below. In his eyes, Maksim saw something that felt like a plea, so human, so desperate it pierced his heart. "We need to act quickly," he muttered, assessing the situation. "But I can't do it alone. I need to call Stepanovich." Maksim slowly backed away, trying not to make any sudden movements. The cub watched him with a wary gaze but didn't move, staying close to his mother. "I'll be back," Maksim promised, not knowing if the animal understood him. "I'll help." He quickly made his way to the river, packed his gear, and nearly ran to the car. On the way, thoughts swirled in his head, just report the wounded animal to the hunting reserve. But what if the rangers decided it was easier to shoot her? Or what if help arrived too late? No, he had to act fast and decisively. The sky was overcast, the air heavy and electric, smelling of ozone. A storm was approaching. Maksim quickened his pace, mentally listing what he'd need for the operation: antibiotics, painkillers, tools to extract the bullet, bandages. Some supplies he had at home, the habit of a field medic, always having a first aid kit ready. But for a large animal, it might not be enough. When he reached Talinka, the first raindrops were already drumming on the roof of his UAZ. Maksim parked at Stepanovich's house and dashed into the strengthening downpour. "Stepanovich," he banged on the door. "Open up, it's urgent." The door swung open almost immediately. Stepanovich, alarmed and holding a rifle, stared at the soaked Maksim. "What happened?" "A bear," Maksim blurted. "Wounded." "With a cub." "In the northern woods." Stepanovich frowned. "We have to help. She's dying. Bullet wound. It's getting infected." The old ranger looked at Maksim like he was crazy. "Help a bear? Are you insane, boy? It's a wild animal. Dangerous. If she's wounded, she's twice as dangerous." "She can't move," Maksim replied. "And the cub, he led me to her himself. Asked for help." "Asked?" Stepanovich eyed him skeptically. Maksim quickly told him about his encounters with the cub. Stepanovich listened silently, his expression darkening. "Incredible," he admitted when Maksim finished. "But still, this is madness. Going near a wounded bear? I'll call the district, let them send a team from the reserve. They'll arrive tomorrow. Or the day after. By then, she'll be dead. What do you suggest?" Stepanovich narrowed his eyes. You plan to treat her yourself? Yes, Maksim answered firmly. I've got medical training. I was a field medic, remember? You treated people, not bears. A bullet's a bullet. Same for a bear. The principles are the same. But I need your help and painkillers for large animals. Stepanovich was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the intensifying rain. Finally, he sighed. I knew your father, Max. He was just as stubborn. Once spent a whole night nursing a wounded wolf pup, everyone told him to let it go, that it wouldn't survive. And what happened to the pup? Maksim asked, hearing the story for the first time. Stepanovich gave a half-smile. It lived. They sent it to the reserve. Heard it became the leader of a pack. He paused, then nodded decisively. I've got a tranquilizer, use it sometimes to tag moose. Should work on a bear. Great, Maksim nodded. What else do we need? My medkit. Your medkit. Tools, Stepanovich began listing supplies. And a rifle. We don't need a rifle, Maksim shook his head. Listen, kid. I get your ideals. But if something goes wrong, we need protection. The bear might not appreciate our good intentions. Maksim wanted to argue, but suddenly he saw Lyoka, his friend, bleeding out on a dusty road in Afghanistan. Why didn't you shoot, Max? Why didn't you cover us? He blinked the memory away. Fine, he agreed reluctantly. But only as a last resort. They left 20 minutes later. By then, the rain had become a full downpour. The storm raged above the forest. Thunder shook the ground, and lightning split the sky into blinding white shards. What weather, grumbled Stepanovich, struggling to keep the vehicle on the muddy road. Just like 79, before the flood. We'll make it, Maksim encouraged him, staring into the gray haze outside. As long as we get there before dark. The road twisted between the trees, turning into a swamp in places. Finally, when they were about a kilometer from the northern bank, the UAZ got stuck in a deep rut. We walk from here, Stepanovich decided, killing the engine. Pray we don't need a tractor to get it out later. They unloaded in the pouring rain, backpacks heavy with medicine and tools. Stepanovich checked the tranquilizer gun and tucked it under his coat. Maksim noticed the old man had also brought a regular rifle, just in case. How far? Stepanovich shouted over the rain. About 800 meters, Maksim replied. Behind the big pine, turn toward the river, then 300 meters through the forest. They slowly advanced along the soaked trail, each step a struggle as the ground slipped under their feet. Dusk deepened, thickened by storm clouds. Maksim led the way, trying to stay on track. Visions from the past flickered before his eyes, mountain roads in Afghanistan, wounded comrades, blood on his hands. He shook his head. Not now, he told himself. When they reached the spot where Maksim had last seen the cub, it was clear the animals were gone. Damn, Maksim cursed. Maybe they went deeper into the woods to escape the rain, Stepanovich suggested. Or maybe the mother bear got up and led the cub away. With that wound? Doubt it. Wait, I'll look around. Maksim began circling the clearing, scanning the wet ground. The rain had nearly washed everything away, but here and there, he could still make out the imprints of bare paws in the mud. This way, he called to Stepanovich. They went this way. In that direction, the tracks led to a small ravine overgrown with dense shrubs. At the bottom of the ravine, under a natural canopy formed by interwoven branches, they found the mother bear with her cub. The bear lay motionless but breathing, her side rising and falling heavily. The cub, upon seeing the people, stood between them and his mother, growling menacingly. "Easy, little one, easy," Maksim spoke gently. "Remember me? I brought help." The cub calmed slightly upon recognizing his voice but remained watchful of every movement, especially eyeing Stepanovich nervously, likely because he smelled of gunpowder. "So, what now?" asked Stepanovich, unpacking the gear under the canopy where it was relatively dry. "First, the tranquilizer," Maksim replied, pulling out a dart gun. "Once she's asleep, we'll inspect the wound." Stepanovich nodded. "Aim carefully. If you miss or the dose isn't enough, we'll have trouble." Maksim took a deep breath, aimed, and fired. The dart hit the bear's shoulder. She flinched and growled weakly but lacked the strength to rise. The cub grew anxious, nudging his mother and whining. "Now we wait," said Maksim. 10 minutes, at least." They stepped back several meters and sat on a fallen tree. The rain was gradually easing, though water still dripped from the branches. Stepanovich pulled out a flask and took a sip. "Want some?" he offered. "Cedar nut tincture. Helps in these cases." Maksim took a swig. The strong, fragrant liquid burned his throat and spread warmth through his body. "Is that why you left the army?" Stepanovich suddenly asked. "Because of your compassion for all living things?" Maksim remained silent for a long time, watching the rain drip from the spruce branches. "Not exactly," he finally answered. "More because of what I learned there." "And what was that?" Stepanovich asked, watching him closely. "That life is fragile," Maksim said quietly. "And that sometimes one decision, one action, is enough to end or save it." He fell silent, and though Stepanovich didn't press, Maksim unexpectedly began to speak about something he hadn't even shared in therapy after demobilization. "We were on a mountain road, returning to base. A standard route, used hundreds of times. I was in charge of our APC. Lyoka, my friend from the academy, was at the machine gun. We were joking about something, I don't even remember what. Then I noticed movement on the slope, about 300 meters away. Some people. I should have ordered a stop and check, but we were only 15 minutes from base. I figured they were local herders." Maksim swallowed hard. "They weren't. It was a group of Taliban with a grenade launcher. They fired just as we passed a narrow section. The lead APC exploded instantly. We were thrown back by the blast, our vehicle flipped. We got out and returned fire, but we were outnumbered. Lyoka died first, a sniper. Then Seryoga. Pasha. I was the medic. I was supposed to help, but I couldn't even reach them. Then support came from the helicopters, and it was over. But it was already too late." Stepanovich listened in silence. When Maksim finished, he simply placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, son. Things happen in war." "I know." Maksim nodded. "I know that, in my head. But here," he tapped his chest, "it still lingers. The thought that if I'd made a different choice, seen them earlier, that what if can drive you crazy," Stepanovich said grimly. "I went through it after Afghanistan. Woke up in a sweat every night. Always wondering, what if I'd ordered them to take cover? What if I hadn't taken that route? Doesn't help, Max. You can't change the past. But the future, that's still in your hands." "Maybe that's the point," Maksim said quietly, looking at the bear. "To make the right choices now, in the present." "Maybe," Stepanovich agreed. Just don't try to save the whole world. You'll break under the weight." They fell silent. The storm was moving away, and the thunder grew fainter. Between the clouds, a patch of clear sky appeared. "Time," Maksim said, checking his watch. The tranquilizer should have kicked in. They approached the bear cautiously. She was breathing evenly and deeply, sedated. The cub paced nearby, nervous but not aggressive. "Strange," Stepanovich noted. "Usually, they fear people like fire. But this one seems to understand we're here to help." "Maybe he does," Maksim agreed, putting on rubber gloves. "Animals sense our intentions better than we think." He carefully examined the wound. The bullet had entered her side and lodged in the muscle. Fortunately, no vital organs were damaged, though there was significant inflammation. The skin around the wound was hot and swollen. "We're lucky," Maksim said, preparing his tools. "The bullet didn't go deep. I can remove it." "But if she wakes up early, she shouldn't," Stepanovich interrupted. "But I'll be ready with another dose, just in case." Maksim worked methodically, like in an operating room, cleaning the wound, applying antiseptic, carefully extracting the bullet, rinsing the cavity with antibiotics, and wrapping it with a tight bandage. "Strange bullet," Stepanovich said, inspecting the metal fragment. "Not hunting, military." 7.62 caliber, Maksim confirmed. "Assault rifle or carbine. Poachers with military weapons." "Serious and dangerous," Stepanovich added darkly. "They'd kill for their prize." Maksim was about to reply when a branch snapped in the forest. Both men froze. The sound didn't repeat, but that old gut instinct, honed in combat zones, screamed danger. "We may have been followed," Stepanovich said quietly. "The same poachers. We need to finish and leave." Maksim quickly gave one last antibiotic injection. "Help me drag her deeper under the canopy so the ropes aren't visible." They moved the bear to the farthest corner of the natural shelter. The cub watched cautiously, curious but unhelpful. "What now?" Stepanovich asked. "Now we get out of here and lead any possible pursuers away from them." Maksim quickly packed up the tools. "The bear will sleep a few more hours. By morning, the tranquilizer will wear off. If all goes well, the antibiotics will work and the fever will drop. She'll need a few more days to regain strength. But the worst is over if the poachers don't find her first." "They won't," Maksim said firmly. "We'll distract them." They left the ravine and headed for the trail, deliberately not covering their tracks. If someone was indeed watching, let them believe they had left with the bears, or found nothing at all. Night had fully set in. The rain had stopped, replaced by a thick fog that blanketed the forest in a ghostly shroud. They moved slowly, often stopping to orient themselves. "Hear that?" Stepanovich whispered, halting. Maksim listened. Amid the usual forest sounds, another noise emerged, muffled voices up ahead. "People," he whispered back. "About 100 meters." "What now?" "We go around and see who they are." They left the trail, moving silently. The fog helped conceal them but also made observation difficult. Eventually, they reached a small rise and saw what they were looking for. In a clearing lit by dim flashlights stood 2 SUVs. 3 men in camouflage stood nearby, armed with assault rifles. Judging by their movements and bearing, they were ex-military. "Poachers," Stepanovich whispered. "Not just any, professionals." "They're looking for the bear," Maksim realized. "Probably tracked her days ago, wounded her, lost the trail, and now they've found us." They think we'll lead them to her, Stepanovich said grimly. What do they want from her? Meat. Bile, Stepanovich answered curtly. Bear bile sells for a fortune on the black market. Used in traditional Chinese medicine. One bear can bring in thousands of dollars. And this is a whole business operation. Maksim clenched his fists. Hunting for food or pelts is one thing. But killing an animal for a single organ, condemning it to a slow, painful death, that's beyond me. We have to stop them, he said firmly. How? There's 3 of them, heavily armed. We've only got an old shotgun. Call the police. No signal, you know that. Nearest tower is 20 kilometers away. Maksim paused, thinking. The situation seemed hopeless. Then a spark of an idea flashed in his mind. Stepanovich, remember back in '83, when you drove those poachers from the far outpost? The old ranger chuckled. How could I forget? We staged, he fell silent, suddenly understanding. You're not suggesting, exactly, Maksim nodded. A forest fire. They won't risk staying, too obvious. But they'll be forced to leave. Risky, Stepanovich said. Got a better idea? He paused, then nodded firmly. No. Let's do it. The plan was both simple and dangerous. Stepanovich, being more experienced in the woods, was to sneak close to the poachers' vehicles and puncture the tires on one of them, enough to disable it but not raise immediate suspicion. Meanwhile, Maksim was to create a distraction on the opposite side of the clearing. They split up. Maksim waited for Stepanovich to get into position, then he moved about 200 meters away from the clearing and fired loudly into the air with the flare gun Stepanovich had wisely brought along. A bright red flare soared above the forest, illuminating everything around with a ghostly light for a moment. Then, Maksim started running, deliberately making noise, breaking branches, yet still careful not to reveal his exact position. The plan worked. Panic erupted in the clearing. The poachers, thinking they were surrounded by the police, ran toward their vehicles. Maksim, hiding behind a thick tree trunk, watched them hastily load some crates into the trunks. Then one of them climbed onto the footboard of the SUV, trying to see something in the darkness. From a distance, Maksim heard a yell from a ranger, "Let's move." Engines roared to life and the cars started moving. But one of them, after driving just 20 meters, suddenly tilted. Stepanovich's sabotage had worked. The wheel, someone shouted. We hit a spike, switch cars. Leave everything, just go. The driver of the damaged vehicle jumped out, grabbed a backpack from the back seat, and ran to the second SUV. Within a minute, both vehicles disappeared from sight, leaving only a cloud of exhaust fumes and tracks in the wet soil. Maksim waited several more minutes, listening. Convinced the poachers were truly gone, he stepped out from his hiding place and headed to the meeting point with Stepanovich. The old ranger was already waiting, grinning. It worked, he said. But they'll come back. Maybe not today, but definitely tomorrow. By then, Maksim said resolutely, we'll already have moved the mother bear and her cub. Moved where? Stepanovich asked in surprise. To the reserve. I'll call Michalik, he'll arrange transport. They'll be safe there until the mother recovers. And after that, we'll release them back into the forest, far from here, where there are no poachers. Stepanovich scratched his chin thoughtfully. You know, Max, you're right. It's the best option, for the bears and for us. Why for us? Because those poachers are serious men. If they find out who saved their prey, we're in big trouble. Maksim nodded. He understood the risk. But something inside him, that same feeling that had haunted him since meeting the cub, told him he was doing the right thing. "Let's go," he said. "We need to check on our patient." When they returned to the ravine, the mother bear was still asleep under the tranquilizer. The cub lay beside her, pressed against her warm side. Upon seeing them, he lifted his head but didn't show aggression, only watched their movements warily. "I'll check the bandage," Maksim said, carefully approaching the animals. The wound looked better than he expected. The bleeding had stopped, and the bandage held firmly. Maksim gently touched the bear's forehead. "The fever seems to have gone down," he said with relief. "The antibiotics are working. Now the main thing is to wait for morning and call for help." "What about the poachers?" Stepanovich asked. "They saw our tracks. They might return." "I don't think they'll risk it now," Maksim replied. "The flare might have drawn the attention of other rangers or the police. They'll lie low for now. By morning, we'll be ready for transport." Stepanovich nodded. "We'll have to spend the night here. I'll keep watch. You get some rest, you look like you're about to collapse." Maksim wanted to argue but suddenly realized just how tired he was. The adrenaline that had fueled him for the past few hours had drained away, leaving behind a leaden exhaustion. "All right," he agreed. "But wake me in 3 hours, I'll take over the watch." They made a small camp away from the bears. Stepanovich lit a small fire, just enough for warmth but not enough to draw attention. Maksim laid out a waterproof cloak and lay down, using his backpack as a pillow. Sleep came instantly, but it was restless. He dreamed of Afghanistan, hot sand, the smell of gunpowder, the cries of the wounded. Again and again, he saw Lyoka's face, pale from blood loss, eyes silently asking, "Why didn't you save us, Max?" But this time, the dream changed. Instead of Lyoka, he saw the bear cub, looking at him with the same silent plea. And a voice, belonging to none of his fallen comrades, whispered, "You can still make it right. It's not too late." Maksim jolted awake, sitting up abruptly. His heart pounded, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked around. Stepanovich was dozing by the fire, leaning against a tree. The mother bear and cub were asleep in their shelter. Everything was quiet. But then, why the unease? Then he heard it, a soft crack of branches, barely distinguishable from the usual night sounds of the forest. Someone was approaching their camp, moving silently. Maksim quickly woke Stepanovich, covering his mouth with his hand to stop him from crying out. "Someone's coming," he whispered. 3 or 4 people, from different directions. Stepanovich woke instantly. Years of hunting and war in Afghanistan had taught him to react swiftly to danger. "Poachers," he mouthed silently. Maksim nodded, "Most likely." "What do we do?" "We don't stand much chance against automatic weapons," Stepanovich said grimly. "But we can try to lead them away from the bears." "How?" "I'll go one way, you go the other, we make noise, distract them. Meet at the car in an hour. If something goes wrong, run to the village and call for help." Maksim wanted to argue but knew it was their only chance. He nodded. "Be careful, Stepanovich." "You too, son." They quickly gathered the essentials. Stepanovich took his rifle, Maksim took a knife and the remaining medical supplies. After exchanging a final glance, they went their separate ways. Maksim moved carefully, trying not to make noise, until he was about 100 meters from the camp. Then he deliberately stepped on a dry branch, causing a loud crack. Without stopping, he ran on, making as much noise as possible while still concealing his exact location. The plan worked. Voices and footsteps came from behind. Someone was chasing him. Maksim sped up, zigzagging between the trees like a hare. His advantage was knowledge of the terrain. He had run through these woods since childhood. The poachers, no matter how prepared, were strangers here. He led them further from the ravine, from the bears, from Stepanovich. His lungs burned, his heart pounded, but Maksim didn't stop. The chase strangely reminded him of academy training, only now, the danger was real. Suddenly, he saw water glinting ahead, the Karenga River, at the very spot where he'd fished that morning. He stopped abruptly, looking around. The pursuers were lagging, but he could still hear their voices. They were closing in. The decision came instantly. Maksim shed his jacket and boots and jumped into the river. The cold water burned his skin, but he paid it no mind. With strong strokes, he swam toward the opposite bank, trying to stay quiet. When the poachers reached the bank, Maksim was already halfway across. The current was strong, but he managed using techniques he'd learned as a teenager. There, in the water, someone shouted. Maksim dove. The cold paralyzed his movements, but fear gave him strength. He swam underwater for about 10 meters before surfacing to breathe. Gunshots rang out over the river. Bullets splashed into the water nearby. Maksim dove again and swam, guided more by instinct than vision. When he surfaced again, he was closer to the far bank. The shooting had stopped. Apparently, the poachers had lost sight of him in the darkness, or thought he'd drowned. With his last strength, Maksim reached the shore and crawled out onto the wet sand. His body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the stress. But he couldn't stop. He quickly got up and ran along the riverbank, staying in the shadows of the trees. Stepanovich, the thought flashed. What about him? Did he escape? Maksim knew he had to return to the car. That was where they agreed to meet. But how to cross the river again? Swimming was too risky. He was out of strength. He needed to find a ford or a bridge. He ran until he was out of breath, then slowed to a brisk walk. After half an hour, an old wooden bridge came into view. Locals used it in spring to move cattle to the flood meadows. Maksim approached cautiously. The area was quiet, just the river's murmur and the occasional cry of night birds. He listened for sounds that didn't belong in the forest, but heard nothing suspicious. The bridge was narrow, without railings, barely a meter wide. Some boards were rotting, creating dangerous gaps. Maksim stepped onto the first plank, testing its strength. It creaked but held. Step by step, he crossed, keeping his balance and avoiding looking down at the rushing water. When only a few meters remained, one board snapped under his weight. Maksim instinctively leapt forward, barely managing to grab the edge of the bridge. His heart pounded wildly. Pulling himself up with trembling arms, he made it across and ran the remaining distance. Now back on familiar ground, Maksim oriented himself and ran toward the clearing where they'd left the car. He moved cautiously, stopping often to listen. The forest, so familiar during the day, now felt alien and hostile. At last, the trees parted and the clearing appeared. Maksim slowed and crouched, careful not to reveal himself. He parted the branches and peered through. The UAZ was in place, but no sign of Stepanovich or the poachers. He waited a few minutes, watching. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Where was Stepanovich? Worry grew with every minute. They had agreed to meet here. Had the old man not made it? Or had he been caught? Maksim decided to wait. He found a good hiding spot in the bushes with a clear view of the clearing and settled in, trying to stop shivering in his soaked clothes. Time dragged unbearably slow. Maksim checked his watch repeatedly. The glowing hands showed 3 a.m. They had split up around 2 o'clock. Stepanovich should be here by now. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed in the forest, then another, very close, maybe just a few 100 meters away. Maksim jumped up, straining to see into the darkness. Who had fired, Stepanovich or the poachers? Had they found him? He hesitated. On the one hand, he had to go help. On the other, what could he do unarmed against heavily armed men? The decision came instantly. Maksim ran to the car. If Stepanovich was alive, he would head here. If not, Maksim had to get to the village and call for backup as fast as possible. He approached the UAZ cautiously, ready to dive for cover at any moment. The silence was absolute. Even the usual forest sounds had gone still after the shots. Suddenly, he heard a rustling from the forest. Maksim froze, staring into the darkness. Someone was approaching, walking heavily, groaning. "Stepanovich?" Maksim called softly. A weak voice answered. It was the old man. The sound was music to Maksim's ears. He rushed forward and saw Stepanovich barely walking between the trees. The right sleeve of his jacket was soaked in blood. "My God, you've been wounded." Maksim supported the old man, helping him walk. "A scratch," Stepanovich rasped. "The bullet grazed me. I got lucky." "Let's get to the car, we need to bandage this." They reached the UAZ, and Maksim helped Stepanovich into the front seat. Quickly retrieving the first aid kit from the glove compartment, he cut open the sleeve and examined the wound. The bullet had only grazed the muscle in his shoulder, but there was a lot of blood. "Hold on," Maksim warned as he pulled out antiseptic. "This will sting." Stepanovich clenched his teeth but didn't make a sound when the liquid touched the wound. Maksim quickly disinfected the tissue, applied a sterile dressing, and secured it with a bandage. "What happened?" he asked once the bandaging was done. Stepanovich sighed deeply. "They tracked me. I thought I'd gotten far enough, but they knew the forest better than we expected. They surrounded me, drove me like an animal. I returned fire, but there were 3 of them. One flanked me and shot. I fell into a ravine, they thought I was dead. Lucky me." "The bear?" Maksim asked anxiously. "I don't know," Stepanovich shook his head. "Everything was quiet when I left. Maybe they didn't find them. Or maybe they did," he finished grimly. "We have to go back." "You're crazy. They'll kill us. And if they find the mother bear, they'll kill her and the cub. I can't let that happen." Stepanovich looked at Maksim for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "Ah, Max. You're as stubborn as your father. He always stood his ground, even if the whole world was against him." He paused, then nodded resolutely. "All right. But first, we need a plan. And weapons." "Weapons?" Maksim asked in surprise. "There's another rifle in the trunk," Stepanovich explained. "An old carbine, but it's accurate, and I've got ammo for it." Maksim hesitated. He had promised himself never to touch a weapon again. But innocent lives were at stake now. "All right," he finally said. "Give me the carbine, but I'll only shoot as a last resort." "That'll be enough," Stepanovich nodded. Now listen to the plan. They approached the ravine from opposite sides, using maximum caution. Maksim moved along the forest edge, and despite his injury, Stepanovich came in from the other side. Their plan was simple: create the illusion of being surrounded, make the poachers believe reinforcements had arrived. Dawn had already begun to tint the sky gray, improving visibility. Maksim stopped at the edge of the clearing leading to the ravine and listened. Silence, no voices, no footsteps, no machinery. Maybe the poachers hadn't returned yet. He crept forward, carbine at the ready. The weapon felt unnaturally heavy in his hands, as if it resisted being used. Suddenly, a shadow flickered ahead. Maksim froze and focused. A man in camouflage stood on the edge of the ravine, surveying the area with an automatic rifle in his hands. Maksim carefully retreated and radioed Stepanovich. "One man at the edge of the ravine," he whispered. "Armed?" "Got it," Stepanovich replied. "I've got activity on my side too. They found the bears." Maksim's heart clenched. "They're alive?" "Can't see from here, but judging by their behavior, the mother is still unconscious. We're starting the plan. On 3. Maksim took a deep breath, steeling himself. The carbine in his hands felt heavier than ever. 1, 2, 3. He fired into the air, shouting, "Police! Everyone stay where you are." From the opposite side, Stepanovich also fired and yelled, "Flank them. Don't let anyone escape." The plan worked. Panic erupted in the clearing. Believing they were surrounded by police, the poachers bolted for their vehicles. "Move! Now," someone shouted. Maksim fired another shot in the air to maintain the illusion of a raid. He saw 3 men in camouflage running across the clearing, firing blindly toward him. Bullets whistled overhead, forcing him to duck. Moments later, engine roars echoed. The poachers were fleeing. Maksim waited a bit longer, then radioed Stepanovich. "Looks like it worked. They're gone." "Yeah," Stepanovich confirmed. "I see the cars driving off. Meet me at the ravine." Maksim hurried toward the ravine, heart pounding. What if they were too late? What if the poachers had already harmed the bears? Stepanovich was waiting at the edge, clutching his wounded arm. "You okay?" Maksim asked, noticing how pale he looked. "I'll live," the old man muttered. "Let's check on our charges." They carefully descended into the ravine. At first glance, everything looked as they had left it: dense foliage, a small shelter made of interwoven branches. But as they approached, Maksim noticed something wrong. The cub was missing. "Where's the little one?" he asked anxiously, peering into the shadows under the shelter. The mother bear was in the same spot, her side rising and falling slowly. She was alive but still under the tranquilizer's effects. The bandage on her wound was intact. But the cub was nowhere in sight. "Maybe he got scared and ran off when he heard the gunfire," Stepanovich suggested. "Or the poachers took him," Maksim said grimly. "Bear cubs are valuable on the black market. They sell them to private zoos or trainers." He examined the ground around the shelter. No signs of a struggle, no blood, only trampled grass and a few heavy boot prints. "We need to search the area," Maksim decided. "Maybe he's just hiding nearby." They split up, combing every bush and burrow within 50 meters of the ravine. Maksim called the cub's name, hoping he would hear the familiar voice and come out. But the search yielded nothing. The cub had vanished. "We need to focus on the mother now," Stepanovich finally said when they regrouped. "She'll wake up in a couple of hours." If we want to move her to the reserve, we need to act fast. And the cub? Maksim couldn't accept that the little one was gone. We're not abandoning him, Stepanovich explained patiently. But there's nothing we can do right now. If the poachers took him, he's far away by now. And if he just hid from fear, he'll return once he feels safe. The best thing we can do is save his mother. Maksim knew the old man was right, but his heart refused to accept it. He felt a strange bond with the little creature who had so trustingly sought his help. The thought of the cub in a cage, in cruel hands, was unbearable. "All right," he finally said. "Let's focus on the mother. I'll call Mikhailuk and have him send a transport team." Stepanovich nodded with relief. "Good. And about the cub, we'll put out an alert. If the poachers try to sell him, there's a chance they'll be tracked." Maksim took out his phone, but still no signal. "We'll have to drive to the highway," he said. "There's signal there." "I'll stay with the mother," Stepanovich decided. "You go. But be careful, the poachers might still be in the forest." Maksim nodded and quickly headed to the car. Dawn had fully arrived. A pink sun rose over the horizon. A new day brought new hopes and new fears. The UAZ started on the first try, as if sensing the urgency. Maksim drove cautiously along the forest road, trying not to make noise. Now that the danger had passed, exhaustion hit him with full force. The sleepless night, stress, and cold river bath had taken their toll. He turned on the radio to stay awake. An old song played, something from the band Mashina Vremeni about the roads we choose. Maksim smiled to himself, how symbolic. The road twisted between the trees, becoming more and more drivable. Finally, the highway appeared ahead, a smooth gray ribbon stretching toward the horizon. He pulled over and took out his phone. 2 signal bars, not perfect, but enough. He dialed Mikhailuk, the director of the nearest wildlife reserve. The call was answered after the 3rd ring. "Hello," came a hoarse voice. "Who's calling this early?" "Mikhailuk, it's Maksim Varnin from Talinka. Sorry for calling so early, but it's urgent." "Maksim? Nikolai's son?" The voice on the other end brightened. "What's going on?" Maksim quickly explained, "Wounded mother bear, poachers, a stolen cub." Mikhailuk listened in silence, occasionally grunting in surprise or outrage. "All right," he said when Maksim finished. "I'll send a team with a transport and a vet. They'll be with you in an hour. As for the poachers, I'll contact the police and wildlife authorities. If they're still around, we'll catch them." "Thank you, Mikhailuk," Maksim exhaled with relief. "We'll wait at the turnoff to the northern spit." "Got it. And Maksim, you did good. Your father would have been proud." Those simple words unexpectedly touched Maksim to the core. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thank you, Mikhailuk. See you soon." After hanging up, Maksim sat still for a moment, staring at the road. The past day's events flashed before his eyes like scenes from a movie: the fishing trip, the cub, the wounded mother, the chase, the gunfire. "Your father would be proud." Those words echoed in his head like a blessing. Maybe that was why he had returned to Talinka, not just for peace, but to find his true self. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching engine. A black SUV with tinted windows was heading down the highway. Something about it felt familiar. Maksim tensed, watching the vehicle. The SUV slowed as it passed the parked UAZ. For a moment, their eyes met, Maksim and the driver in a camouflage jacket. It was the same poacher he had seen in the forest. The SUV suddenly sped up, covering the UAZ in a cloud of exhaust. Maksim instinctively reached for the ignition. He had to follow them. But then he saw something that made his heart freeze. In the back seat of the SUV, a small brown figure flashed. The cub. They had really taken him. Without hesitation, Maksim started the engine and turned the wheel, directing the UAZ after the fleeing SUV. He knew the odds of catching a modern vehicle in an old UAZ were slim, but he had to try. The highway twisted between hills, rising and falling. Maksim pushed the old vehicle to its limits. The speedometer needle trembled at 90 kilometers per hour. A black SUV appeared ahead, the limit for this vehicle. The poachers hadn't expected a chase and were driving at a normal speed, following traffic rules. Maksim was gradually closing the distance. He could now make out the license plate and memorized it, just in case the chase didn't succeed. Suddenly, the SUV accelerated sharply. They had realized they were being pursued. Maksim floored the gas pedal, but the distance began to grow. Ahead was a sharp turn. The SUV took it at high speed, swaying on its suspension. Maksim tried to follow the maneuver, but the old UAZ wasn't built for such loads. The vehicle skidded, the wheels lost traction, everything happened in a split second. The UAZ flew off the road, crashed into some bushes, and came to a stop with its bumper pressed against a young birch. Maksim climbed out with difficulty. Fortunately, the speed hadn't been too high, and he escaped with only bruises. The UAZ wasn't too badly damaged, a dented bumper, a crumpled hood, and a broken headlight. He helplessly watched the SUV disappear into the distance, the black dot shrinking until it vanished over the horizon. Damn, Maksim struck the hood with his fist. Damn, damn, damn. He had lost. The poachers got away and took the bear cub with them. Now, the little creature faced a grim fate, a cage, training, maybe even death if no buyer was found. Maksim took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. He needed to act rationally. He had memorized the license plate and had a phone. He had to call the police, report the poachers, and describe the vehicle. Maybe they could intercept it at a checkpoint or in the city. He dialed the emergency number. After a short ring, a calm female voice answered, "Unified Rescue Service, what happened?" "I need the police," Maksim said quickly. "I just saw poachers transporting a kidnapped bear cub." "A black SUV, the plate is," he gave the number and described the vehicle. The operator listened attentively, clarifying the details, where exactly he had seen the poachers, in what direction they were headed, how many people were in the car. "Information received," she said when Maksim finished. "A patrol is being dispatched to the area. Stay on the line." Maksim thanked her and hung up. Now, there was nothing left but to wait. He inspected the UAZ. Luckily, the engine was unharmed, and the vehicle still started. Slowly and carefully, Maksim got back on the road and headed toward the turnoff to the northern spit, where he was supposed to meet the reserve team. The sun was already high, promising a hot day. The forest on both sides of the road buzzed with birdsong, as if nothing had happened. Nature lived its own life, indifferent to human drama. When Maksim reached the turn, Stepanovich was already there, looking tired but composed. "How did it go?" he asked as Maksim got out of the car. "I got through to Mikhailuk." "The team's on their way," Maksim nodded. "They'll be here in half an hour." He told Stepanovich about his encounter with the poachers and the failed pursuit. Stepanovich listened grimly, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did everything you could, Max. Now it's up to the police and the wildlife authorities. I failed him, Maksim said quietly. The cub trusted me, and I couldn't protect him. Don't talk nonsense, Stepanovich said firmly. You saved his mother. Without you, they'd both be dead. And it's not over yet. The police might still intercept them. Maksim wanted to believe that, but a heavy feeling of guilt weighed on him. He felt he had let down not just the cub, but himself, again unable to protect those who needed him. They smoked in silence, leaning against the UAZ. Maksim wasn't a regular smoker, but now, Stepanovich's cigarette seemed like salvation, something to calm his nerves. You know, Stepanovich said suddenly, staring into the distance, I once failed to save someone too. Back in Afghanistan. A local boy, about 10. He stuck close to our unit, helped with small tasks. We fed him, gave him clothes, we grew fond of him. Then the Mujahideen found out he was with us. The old man paused, inhaling deeply. We couldn't save him. I still see him in my dreams. Maksim said nothing, understanding Stepanovich wasn't sharing this for no reason. Why am I telling you this? The old man continued. Because you can't save everyone, Max, no matter how hard you try. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Every life saved is a victory, however small. And every lost one? Maksim asked quietly. Every lost one is a lesson, and a reason to try harder next time. In the distance, engine noise was heard. They turned and saw a convoy of 3 vehicles approaching along the highway, 2 vans with the reserve's logo and a police UAZ. Here's the backup, said Stepanovich, tossing his cigarette and crushing it under his boot. Now we've got this. The vehicles stopped beside them. From the first van emerged a heavy-set man in his 60s with a thick grey beard, Mikhailuk. Behind him came a young ranger and a middle-aged woman with a medical bag slung over her shoulder. Hello, Maksim. Mikhailuk shook his hand firmly. Been a while. Too bad it's under these circumstances. Stepanik, he nodded to the old ranger. How's your arm? I'll live, he waved it off. Right now, the bear needs help more than I do. From the police vehicle came 2 officers, a young sergeant and an older captain. Captain Ryabov, he introduced himself. We got the call about the poachers. Was it you? Yes, Maksim nodded. Black Japanese SUV. I memorized the plate. He repeated the number and described the poachers as best he could. The captain noted everything down. We've issued an alert to all checkpoints, he said. If they try to leave the area, we'll catch them. But we need your testimony and proof of illegal activity. There's plenty of proof, Stepanovich interjected. The bear has a bullet wound, clearly not from a hunting rifle. Here's the bullet we removed. He handed the captain a wrapped metal object. And our testimony, we saw them armed in a protected area where hunting is banned. The captain nodded, taking the bullet. These are serious pieces of evidence, he agreed. But first, we need to inspect the site. Can you guide us? Of course, Maksim replied. But first we need to tend to the bear. She could wake up at any moment. Right, said Mikhailuk. Anna, he turned to the woman with the bag. Are you ready? Yes, she adjusted her glasses. I have everything needed to stabilize her condition. Then let's go, Mikhailuk decided. Maksim, lead the way. They reached the ravine without incident. The bear was still asleep, but her breathing had grown more uneven, the tranquilizer was wearing off. Anna, the reserve's veterinarian, quickly inspected the wound. Not bad, she nodded approvingly to Maksim. For field conditions, this is excellent. The wound's clean, the bandage is holding, but she needs antibiotics and painkillers before transport. She pulled out syringes and ampoules. Hold her head, she asked the ranger. Anna administered several injections, then reinforced the bandage. All done, she said. Now we can move her. The rangers unfolded a special stretcher for large animals. Together, Maksim, Stepanovich, Mikhailik, and the young ranger, they gently lifted the bear onto the canvas and secured her with straps. Carefully, ordered Mikhailik. No jerking, lift smoothly. They slowly made their way out of the ravine. The bear was heavy, but with 4 carriers, the weight was manageable. Meanwhile, Captain Ryabov and the sergeant examined the site, photographed tracks, and collected evidence. There was clearly a camp here, the captain noted, pointing to trampled grass and a fire pit. Looks like there were 3 or 4 of them. 3, Maksim confirmed. I saw them in the forest and on the road. Professionals, added Stepanovich. Military posture, army weapons, not your typical village poachers. Possibly tied to an international wildlife trafficking ring, the captain speculated. These groups have become more active in Siberia in recent years, high black market prices, especially in China. They carried the bear to a clearing where the vehicles waited. A special van had been prepared with a cage lined with straw and tarp. Carefully, bring her in, Mikhailik commanded. On 3. The bear was gently loaded into the van. Anna checked her condition again, breathing was steady, temperature normal. She'll be fine, she said. She should make the journey without issues. We have everything needed for her treatment at the reserve. Maksim nodded, but his thoughts were far away. He kept replaying the moment he saw the cub in the poacher's vehicle. What would happen to him? Where would they take him? Could he survive without his mother? Mikhailika's heavy hand landed on his shoulder. Don't beat yourself up, Max, the reserve director said quietly. You did more than most would have done in your place. But the cub, we'll find him, Mikhailik said firmly. I've already contacted colleagues in neighboring regions. Everyone's been alerted about the stolen cub. If the poachers try to sell him, we'll know. Maksim wanted to believe it, but doubt clung to him. In the wild, a cub that young without a mother was almost doomed. In the hands of poachers. Will you come with us to the reserve? Mikhailik asked. See how we care for the bear? Maksim nodded. Yes, I want to make sure she'll be okay. Then let's go, Mikhailik said, clapping him on the back. We'll take Stepanovich to the hospital to have his arm properly treated. You ride with me in the lead car. They were getting ready to leave when the sound of an engine came from behind. Everyone turned. A police UAZ was approaching down the forest road. The vehicle stopped, and a police lieutenant stepped out. Captain Ryabov, he called. Yes, the captain responded. What is it? They intercepted the SUV at the Kamienka checkpoint, the lieutenant reported. Black Prado, plate matches the alert. 3 people were detained. Maksim's heart skipped a beat. The bear cub, he burst out. There was a bear cub. The lieutenant shook his head. No bear cub was found in the vehicle, only weapons and empty animal cages. Damn it. Maksim swore. That means they managed to unload him somewhere, or handed him off, or released him when they realized they were being followed, Stepanovich suggested. They got rid of the evidence. In any case, it's a big success, said Captain Ryabov. We've captured a dangerous group of poachers. During interrogation, they might give up accomplices or buyers. This could help uncover the entire network. Maksim nodded, but inside he felt only bitterness. Yes, the poachers were caught, and that was good, but the bear cub, if they released him into the forest far from his mother, his chances of survival were minimal. Small and inexperienced, he wouldn't be able to find enough food or protect himself from predators. "I need to find him," Maksim said firmly. "If they dumped him somewhere along the road, there's a chance he's still alive." "That's like searching for a needle in a haystack," Mikhailuk objected. "The forest is huge, and the bear cub could have gone anywhere." "I have to try," Maksim repeated stubbornly. Otherwise, it's all meaningless." Mikhailuk and Stepanovich exchanged glances. They understood that behind this stubbornness was something more than just a desire to save a wild animal. For Maksim, it had become personal, a way to atone for some past guilt. "All right," Mikhailuk finally said. "We'll take the mother bear to the reserve and begin her treatment. You do what you must, just stay in touch." Captain Ryabov approached them. "If you want to look for the cub, start along the road between the arrest site and the highway. It's likely they ditched him when they realized they were being chased." "Thank you," Maksim nodded. "That's exactly what I'll do." They quickly made a plan. Mikhailuk and the veterinary team would take the mother bear to the reserve. Stepanovich was sent to the district hospital for treatment. Captain Ryabov and a sergeant stayed behind to gather more evidence at the scene, and Maksim, together with a young ranger named Artyom, set off to search for the bear cub. "Just be careful," Mikhailuk warned. "If you find him, don't try to catch him yourselves. Call me, I'll send specialists." "Agreed," Maksim replied, though deep down he wasn't sure he'd be able to keep that promise. If he found the cub in danger or injured, he would act immediately, without waiting for help. Maksim and Artyom drove slowly in their UAZ, scanning the roadsides carefully. Lieutenant Sergeyev had given them the exact location where the poachers were caught, near the DPS post by the village of Kamenka, 15 kilometers from Talinka. So somewhere along that stretch of road, the cub could have been released. "Why do you think they needed the bear cub?" asked Artyom, a young ranger with an open face and observant eyes. "The main value is usually the bile of adult bears." "Bear cubs are also valuable," Maksim replied grimly. "They're sold to private zoos, circuses, baiting stations, sometimes even as exotic pets. A small bear can fetch several $1,000s. Artyom shook his head. "It's cruel, ripping them from the forest and their mothers, condemning them to life in a cage." "People don't care," Maksim said bitterly. "As long as there's money." They drove slowly along the road, examining every turnoff and forest path. The task seemed almost impossible, 15 kilometers of road, and the cub could have been dumped anywhere. "Look!" Artyom suddenly exclaimed, pointing at the roadside. "There's something there." Maksim slammed on the brakes. A few meters off the road lay a small broken animal transport cage. Around it, on the grass, were footprints, heavy boots and tiny bear paws, small but distinct. "He was here," Maksim whispered, kneeling to study the tracks. They let him out of the cage and drove off. "The tracks lead into the forest," Artyom noted. "Looks like the cub ran that way." Maksim studied the prints carefully. Judging by their depth and clarity, they were fresh, maybe an hour or two old. "We can track him," he said resolutely. "The prints are clear, and the ground is soft from the rain." "We should call for backup," Artyom suggested. "It'll be hard alone." Maksim shook his head. "There's no time. If the cub goes deeper into the forest, we'll never find him. We need to follow now, while the trail is fresh. Artyom hesitated but didn't argue. They quickly packed what they needed: water, some food, flashlights in case night fell, a first aid kit. "I'll call Mikhailuk and tell him where we are," Artyom said, pulling out his phone. Just in case, he briefly explained the situation to the reserve's director and gave their coordinates and plan. From the sound of it, Mikhailuk wasn't thrilled with their idea but understood this was their only chance. "He said he'll send people as soon as he can," Artyom reported, putting his phone away, "but asked us to be extremely careful." "We will," Maksim nodded, though safety was the last thing on his mind. They headed into the forest, following the small paw prints. The terrain was hilly, covered in thick underbrush, ferns, and young firs. The trail led farther from the road, winding through the trees. "He doesn't know where he's going," Artyom observed after half an hour of walking. "See how the tracks circle left and right?" "He's lost," Maksim nodded. The cub was clearly frightened and disoriented, running blindly just to escape the humans who had hurt him. The tracks brought them to a small stream where they disappeared. The cub had likely gone into the water, perhaps to throw off the scent or to quench his thirst. "Damn it!" Maksim cursed. "Now we've lost him." "Not necessarily," Artyom replied. "Let's split up. You go upstream, I'll go down." Sooner or later, he would have come out. Maksim nodded. "Good idea. Let's meet back here in an hour. If anyone finds a trail, 3 whistles." They parted ways. Maksim moved slowly along the stream, carefully checking both banks for signs. The stream was shallow, with a rocky bed, sometimes widening into pools, sometimes narrowing to a trickle. Nearly 30 minutes passed with no sign of the cub. Despair crept into Maksim's heart. What if the little bear had gone too far? What if he had been caught by a larger predator? The taiga was full of dangers for a cub separated from its mother. And then he heard it, a faint, barely audible whimpering sound ahead. Maksim froze and listened. The sound came again, plaintive, almost crying. Carefully, trying not to make noise, he moved toward it. Ahead, the stream formed a small waterfall tumbling from a rocky ledge about a meter high. Beneath it was a pool surrounded by thick ferns. And there, curled up by the water's edge, sat the bear cub, the same one Maksim had fed with fish just a day before. Small, wet, and trembling from fear and cold. Maksim's heart skipped a beat. He crouched slowly, trying not to scare the animal. "Hey, little one," he called softly. "Remember me?" The cub lifted his head, sniffing the air. In his eyes was fear, but something else too. Recognition. Hope. "It's me," Maksim continued gently, extending his hand. "I helped your mama. I'll help you too." He carefully pulled a piece of dried meat from his backpack, just in case. The cub tensed, ready to flee, but the smell of food overcame his fear. He sniffed, shifting nervously from paw to paw. "That's it," Maksim whispered encouragingly, placing the meat on the ground between them. "Come here, little one. I won't hurt you." The cub hesitated, torn between hunger and fear. At last, hunger won. He crept closer, eyes fixed on the human, snatched the meat, and retreated to a safe distance. Maksim didn't move, letting the cub get used to him. The cub devoured the meat and looked back at the man, as if weighing his options. "Want more?" Maksim asked softly, pulling out another piece. "Come on." This time the cub came a bit closer, a bit braver. He was still scared, but not panicked anymore. Maksim repeated the process several times, each time placing the meat a little nearer. At last, the bear cub stood within arm's reach. Maksim could see his wet, ruffled fur, the thin little body with visible ribs and frightened eyes. "Good boy," he whispered, carefully extending his hand, palm up, with the final piece of meat. "It's okay, little one. It's okay." The cub froze, staring at the meat, then at the man's face. Then, as if making a decision, he stepped forward and took the meat right from Maksim's hand. It was a moment of astounding trust, almost sacred in its simplicity. A wild animal, frightened and exhausted, had chosen to trust a human. Perhaps he recognized the scent. Perhaps it was just desperation. While the cub ate, Maksim carefully took out his phone and dialed Artyom's number with one hand, trying not to make sudden movements. "I found him," he said softly when the ranger answered. "Upper waterfall, about a kilometer from where we split. He's here with me. And he trusts me now. Try to catch him," Artyom warned. "I'm already on my way to you, and Mikhailuk has sent a team with a tranquilizer." "We'll be there shortly," Maksim replied and ended the call. The bear cub finished eating the meat and looked at Maksim as if asking, "What now?" He was so small, so defenseless, and so trusting despite everything he'd been through. "Your mom is going to be fine," Maksim said softly, knowing the animal couldn't understand the words but might sense the tone. "She'll get better, and you will too. I promise." He slowly, very slowly, reached out and gently touched the cub's head. The little bear flinched but didn't pull away. Maksim softly stroked him between the ears, feeling the wet fur and warm skin under his fingers. The cub closed his eyes slightly, as if enjoying the touch. Perhaps it reminded him of his mother's presence, or maybe it simply gave him a warmth and comfort he so desperately lacked. They sat there like that until Artyom arrived, followed by the reserve team. The cub was gently sedated with a light tranquilizer and placed in a special carrier lined with a soft blanket. "What will happen to him now?" Maksim asked Mikhailuk as the cub was carried to the vehicle. "We'll take him to the reserve where his mother is," replied the director. "We have a special rehabilitation enclosure there. Once both recover, we'll release them back into the forest, just farther from here." "And if the poachers come back?" "They won't," Mikhailuk said firmly. "Captain Ryabov reported that they've confessed everything. It's part of an international wildlife trafficking network. Arrests are happening all across the region. These parts they'll avoid like the plague." Maksim nodded, feeling a heavy weight lift off his shoulders. He had done it. He had saved both the mother bear and her cub, correcting at least one small injustice in this vast, often cruel world. "Will you come with us?" Mikhailuk asked. "See the family reunion?" "Yes," Maksim smiled. "I wouldn't miss it." At the reserve, they were met by Anna, the veterinarian caring for the mother bear. "How is she?" Maksim asked right away. "Stable," Anna replied. "Her fever is going down, the wound is clean. We gave her antibiotics and painkillers. She's regained consciousness, but she's still weak." "Where is she?" "In a special rehabilitation enclosure. Come, I'll show you." They walked through the reserve grounds to a large enclosure surrounded by a high fence. One side was open with trees and a small pond, the other was covered, resembling a cave. There, in the dim light of the artificial shelter, lay the mother bear. She looked better than Maksim had expected. Her fur was clean, her side carefully bandaged. She breathed steadily, occasionally lifting her head to sniff the unfamiliar scents. She's scared and disoriented, Anna explained. That's normal. She needs time to get used to her new environment. And how will she react to her cub? Maksim asked anxiously. Most likely, she won't reject him, said Mikhailuk. Bear mothers are very attached to their cubs. She must feel his absence. They brought the cub's carrier to the enclosure. The little one was starting to wake from the tranquilizer, squirming and whimpering quietly. Ready? Mikhailuk asked, looking at Maksim. He nodded, heart pounding. This was the moment all their efforts would be tested. Would she accept him after everything that had happened? The staff carefully opened the carrier door and set it near the enclosure's entrance. Then, just as cautiously, they opened a small gate into the main area, separating it with a mesh barrier just in case. At first, the cub didn't realize he was free. He peeked out cautiously, sniffing the air. Then, catching a familiar scent, he perked up and made a soft sound, half growl, half whimper. Deep within the enclosure, the mother bear lifted her head. She too had caught the scent, her cub's scent. Slowly, with visible effort, she rose to her feet and took a few steps toward the mesh. Remove the divider, Mikhailuk said quietly. The workers carefully raised the mesh. The cub froze for a moment as if in disbelief, then let out a joyful purr and rushed toward his mother. She greeted him gently, sniffing him all over and nuzzling the back of his neck with her teeth, how bears show affection. The cub pressed against her side, careful not to touch her wound, and finally went still, feeling safe. Maksim watched the scene with a lump in his throat. So much effort, so much risk, and here was the reward. Mother and child, together again. They'll be okay, Mikhailuk said softly beside him. Moments like this make it all worth it. Yes, Maksim agreed. They do. 3 months passed. August was hot and dry. Maksim, now officially working as a veterinary assistant in the reserve, was returning from a routine patrol. After the incident with the mother bear, he had accepted Mikhailuk's offer to stay. He had completed accelerated courses in wildlife veterinary care and learned the basics of zoology and ecology. This work gave him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt since his early army medic days, before Afghanistan, before the loss of his comrades, before the guilt that had poisoned his life. Much had changed in those months. The poachers caught on the northern spit had given up their accomplices, exposing a major wildlife trafficking network. Stepanovich had fully recovered from his injury and now often visited the reserve to see his rescued bears, as he called them. And the mother bear and her cub, they had become something of celebrities. Their rescue story spread beyond the region, across the entire country. Journalists came to film reports, and environmental groups used the case as a shining example of success against poaching. Now, Maksim was headed to their enclosure. Tomorrow, the bears would be released back into the wild, in a remote corner of the reserve, far from human paths. The mother's wound had fully healed. The cub was strong and had grown. They were ready to return to their natural habitat. Approaching the enclosure, Maksim heard the familiar rumble. The cub, seeing him, ran to the fence and stood on his hind legs, front paws on the mesh, a gesture that had become their greeting. Hey, little guy, Maksim smiled, coming closer. How are you today? The cub purred softly, looking at him almost eye to eye now. He had grown a lot. The mother bear, resting in the shade, raised her head and watched them without concern. She was long used to Maksim's presence, perhaps even recognized him. Tomorrow is a big day, Maksim said, knowing the animals didn't understand the words. You're going home. The Real Forest. He pulled an apple from his pocket, the cub's favorite treat, and offered it through the bars. The cub took it gently, impressively careful for a wild animal. Though the bear cub remained untamed, something strange, almost mystical, had formed between him and Maksim. As if that moment by the stream had created a bridge between two completely different worlds. You know, little one, Maksim said quietly, watching the cub chew the apple happily, you've taught me a lot. That sometimes, it's worth risking everything for the right cause. That even the most different beings can understand each other, if they want to. And that there's always a chance to make things right. He said the last words in a whisper, but they carried deep meaning. The nightmares of Afghanistan came less often now. The guilt hadn't vanished, but it no longer choked him. Saving the bears had marked the beginning of a new life, a life where he built instead of destroyed. Maksim, a familiar voice called. He turned and saw Mikhailuk approaching with Stepanovich and a young woman holding a camera. Hey, Maksim greeted them. What's going on? Nothing major, Mikhailuk replied. Just a journalist from regional TV. She wants to do a report on tomorrow's release. The woman extended her hand. Anna Sokolova, editor of an environmental program. I've heard a lot about you, Maksim. Your story with the bears is incredible. Maksim shook her hand, a bit embarrassed. He'd never sought fame and had avoided interviews, leaving that to Mikhailuk as the reserve's official face. Don't exaggerate, he said. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and made the right choice. Not everyone would risk their life to save a wild bear, Stepanovich added. May I ask you a few questions? Anna asked, taking out a recorder. For our report. Maksim wanted to decline, but Mikhailuk's look said it all. This kind of publicity helped the reserve and brought attention to conservation. All right, he agreed. But let's keep it short. They stepped over to a bench beneath a wide pine tree. Anna switched on the recorder and began. Maksim, what made you decide to help an injured predator? Most people would have just passed by or called wildlife services. Maksim paused, choosing his words. You know, sometimes decisions aren't made with your head but with your heart, he said. When I saw that cub, desperately trying to save his mother, it was like a cry for help I couldn't ignore. You served in the army, as a field medic? Anna continued. Did that experience help in saving the mother bear? Yes, my field surgery skills helped, Maksim replied. But it wasn't just that. In war. He paused, for the first time speaking of it publicly. I had seen too many deaths and made a vow to myself that I would never again be the cause of someone's pain. On the contrary, I would save lives wherever possible, even if that life belonged to a wild animal. They were afraid that once the mother bear regained consciousness, she might attack you. Of course I was afraid, Maksim admitted with a slight smile. Only a fool wouldn't fear a bear. But the risk was worth it. Besides, I had a reliable partner, he nodded towards Stepanovich. Without him, none of this would have been possible. The interview lasted about half an hour. Anna asked questions about life in the reserve, future plans, and the relationship between humans and wildlife. Maksim answered honestly and without pretense, trying to convey his understanding of balance in nature and the role humans play in maintaining it. One last question, Anna said finally. What would you like to say to those who watch our report? What message would you like to pass on? Maksim paused. It was an important question, and he wanted to answer sincerely. I would like to say that there is no unbridgeable gap between us and the wild. We are all part of the same world, and this world needs our protection, not just through grand speeches or environmental slogans, but through concrete actions by each individual. Sometimes, it's enough not to look away when someone needs help, whether it's a person or an animal. That small step can change everything. Anna turned off the recorder and smiled. Thank you, Maksim. That was very sincere. We'll come tomorrow to film the bears, if you don't mind. Of course, come, Mikhailuk nodded. It'll be a beautiful sight. When the journalist left, Stepanovich patted Maksim on the shoulder. Wow, you really said it like a philosopher, straight from the heart. Cut it out. Maksim waved him off, embarrassed. I just said what I think. And you said it right, Mikhailuk noted seriously. These are the words people need right now, not moralizing, but sincerity. They stood for a while by the enclosure, watching the bears. The mother bear and her cub lay peacefully in the shade, enjoying their last day in the reserve. Tomorrow, a new life would begin for them, a real, wild one, full of dangers, but also of freedom. Let's go, Mikhailuk finally said. We need to prepare for tomorrow. There's a lot to do. Morning came clear and cool, perfect weather for such an important day. The transport crate with the mother bear and her cub was loaded onto a special truck. Maksim rode in the cabin with the driver, Mikhailuk, and Stepanovich. 2 more vehicles followed, carrying reserve staff and the film crew. They drove for about 2 hours, deeper into the wildest part of the reserve. There were no roads here, only narrow clearings where the truck barely fit. Finally, they reached a small glade surrounded by ancient pines. Here, Mikhailuk decided. Perfect spot, there's a stream nearby, plenty of berries. They'll find dens before winter. Carefully, they unloaded the crate and set it at the edge of the clearing, door facing the forest. Inside, the mother bear paced nervously, sensing her freedom. The cub huddled close to her, frightened by the new sounds and smells. Is everyone ready? Mikhailuk asked, glancing around. The film crew took their positions at a safe distance, while the reserve staff formed a semicircle, ready to guide the bears deeper into the woods and away from people if needed. Ready, the cameraman nodded, raising his camera. Maksim approached the crate and knelt in front of it, looking at the bears one last time. Good luck, he whispered. Take care of each other. The cub approached the bars and gave a soft growl, as if in reply. Their eyes met, man and beast, so different and yet so alike in their will to live. It's time, said Mikhailuk, stepping closer. Maksim nodded and stepped back a few paces. A staff member pulled the rope attached to the crate's latch. The door clanged open. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The mother bear sniffed the air cautiously, hesitant to leave. Then the cub took the first step toward freedom. He peeked out, looked around, and slowly stepped onto the grass. The mother followed, majestic and strong, despite all she had endured. Rising to her full height, she sniffed the forest air, the scent of her true home. The cub stayed close to her, glancing back and forth between the trees and the humans, unsure where to go. Then, as if deciding, he stood on his hind legs and froze for a moment, looking directly at Maksim. That gesture, so familiar, brought a smile to the man's face. Goodbye, little one, he whispered. Be free. The mother bear dropped to all fours and slowly walked into the forest. The cub followed, occasionally looking back at the humans. They walked slowly but confidently, as if they already knew the way. The people watched silently. The cameras buzzed softly, capturing the historic moment. No one spoke, afraid to break the solemnity of the scene. When the bears vanished among the trees, Mikhailuk exhaled. That's it. They're home. Do you think they'll survive? Anna asked, lowering her microphone. I'm sure of it, Mikhailuk nodded. The mother is experienced and strong, and the cub learns quickly. Besides, there's plenty of food here and few threats. Poachers won't reach this place, Stepanovich added. It's the most protected area of the reserve. Rangers patrol it around the clock. Maksim remained silent, staring at the place where the bears had disappeared. His heart was filled with conflicting emotions, joy for their freedom and sadness at parting. Over the past months, he had grown more attached to those unusual animals than he was willing to admit. Let's go, he finally said. It's time. They headed back in a different mood, more thoughtful, but also lighter. The mission was complete. The bears had returned to nature. The circle had closed. What are you thinking about? Stepanovich asked, looking at Maksim's pensive face. How strange everything turned out, he replied. Just 6 months ago, I was a lost man, unsure of what to do with my life. And now I know exactly where I belong. In the reserve? Stepanovich smiled. In the reserve, Maksim nodded, and in these forests, among those who need protection. Mikhailuk, sitting in front, turned around. You know, Max, I've been thinking we need someone to work with large predators. You clearly have a knack for it. How about a promotion? Maksim raised his eyebrows in surprise. Seriously? But I don't have any formal education for that. I'm just a military medic. Education can be earned, Mikhailuk waved it off. But instinct, courage, and dedication, you either have those or you don't. And you do. We'll teach you the rest. Maksim didn't respond right away. The offer was unexpected, but it felt right, as if all the events of the past months had led to this moment, to this choice. I accept, he finally said. Thank you for the trust. Great, said Mikhailuk, extending his hand. They sealed the agreement with a firm handshake. You won't regret it. I already don't, Maksim smiled. 5 years passed. The reserve expanded and became a national park. Maksim now headed the Wildlife Rehabilitation Department, the region's first center specializing in returning animals injured by poachers or misfortune back to the wild. The story of the rescued bear and her cub became legendary. It was told to every new staff member and visitor. Photos of the cub standing on his hind legs before Maksim decorated the center's walls and brochures. One autumn day, Maksim was inspecting a remote area of the national park, a restricted zone where rare animals lived, including those released after rehabilitation. He walked a familiar trail, enjoying the silence and beauty of the forest. Golden and crimson leaves blanketed the ground in a soft carpet. The air was rich with the sense of damp foliage and mushrooms. Suddenly, a shadow flickered ahead. Maksim stopped. In a clearing 50 meters away stood a large brown bear, calmly foraging on berries, moving from bush to bush. Maksim froze, trying not to make a sound. Even for an experienced ranger, a bear encounter required caution. He slowly raised his binoculars. The bear was magnificent, large, with a thick, glossy coat, clearly in his prime. A male, judging by his size and head shape. Something about the bear's movements felt familiar, but Maksim couldn't pinpoint what. Suddenly, the animal stopped and raised his head, sniffing the air. He had sensed the human presence. Maxim tensed, ready to retreat if needed. Bears usually avoided humans, but could act aggressively if they felt threatened. The bear slowly turned toward him. Then something incredible happened. The animal stood up on its hind legs to its full impressive height and froze, staring directly at him. That gesture, so familiar, it struck Maxim like lightning. He lowered the binoculars, barely believing his eyes. "It can't be," he whispered. "The little one." Of course, he couldn't be certain. 5 years had passed. The cub was long since grown. But something in the animal's posture, his gaze, the fact that he didn't run away but instead stood just like he had long ago, it was all too familiar. They stood there for several long seconds, man and bear, separated by distance but united by an invisible thread of memory. Then the bear dropped back to all fours, gave him one last look, and slowly walked into the forest, not afraid, not hurrying. Maxim stood watching him go. He couldn't say with certainty whether it was the same cub they had once saved. Maybe it was just imagination or coincidence, or maybe it was a sign, a reminder that nothing goes unnoticed, that every act of kindness, every life saved, is like a stone thrown into water, creating ripples far beyond our understanding. Smiling at his thoughts, Maxim continued on his way. There was still much work ahead, many lives to protect and help. Behind him lay the wild forest, free and full of life, just as it should be. And somewhere in those majestic trees lived a brown bear who once taught a man the most important lesson of all, that through understanding, we can overcome any barrier, even those between different worlds. Thank you for watching. What did you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comment means a lot to us.